go a little bit in depth in that a little bit, and we'll kind of discuss some of the points of emphasis for that moving forward. So with that, we'll get started. First and foremost, I am Alex Ozuna, FHSAA Assistant Director of Athletics, also in charge of the sport of soccer. For many of you who've done the sport of soccer in the past, you're aware that Corey Sobers was in charge of girls soccer. He is now taken over wrestling. So he's no longer doing soccer in the winter. That leaves me to be in charge of both boys and girls soccer. So it's definitely a challenge, but a challenge I accept. So if you have any questions regarding either boys or girls soccer, it really doesn't matter, just the sport of soccer in general, feel free to reach out to me using the email provided on the screen, as well as my extension at our office line. This first slide right here just displays some of the important dates as it pertains to the sport of soccer, as well as some of the important dates for officials. Just be aware, this information will be posted on your Arbiter Central Hub. So if you do want to access this presentation, you will have this available to you through Arbiter, as well as a recording of this webinar. So you do not have to quickly jot this information down if you don't want to, but just be aware of some of these dates provided here. Like I said, this information will be made available to you after this presentation through your Central Hub and Arbiter. Now let's talk about the soccer evaluation program. The first slide here has a list of all the evaluators. This information will also be on your Arbiter Central Hub. But as you can see, we did expand the list of the evaluators, and that was done on purpose. We sought out all evaluators through the associations. We request each association to submit at least one, if not more, individuals from their associations that can conduct evaluations for the FHSAA. And through that, we conducted a training last week with the evaluators. That way to make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to these evaluations. Going to the next screen, you can see some of the particulars regarding the program. The major change that has occurred through the program is the crew fee went up from $60 to $90. So that is an adjustment, and that's a direct adjustment through some of the initiatives that have been done the last couple of years regarding the officials' fees and how those have gone up for each individual official. It was appropriate that the evaluator's fee also went up. And that $90, it is a maximum rate, so the evaluator can charge less in cases where maybe one or two individuals want to be evaluated, but maybe a third doesn't. So they have the ability to adjust that to a lower rate. They just cannot exceed the $90 limit. And that rate is inclusive of any travel that may be incurred by that evaluator to attend some of those games. Other things to touch on regarding the evaluation program, just remember it is a 2-year evaluation. So if you do take an evaluation, that evaluation will be good for that individual for 2 years. Within that 2-year span, an individual can choose to get evaluated more than once. But if they do, they just that score gets averaged out, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later. How that reflects to an official's rankings. I think just make sure all evaluations are conducted through Arbiter or submitted through Arbiter. If an association does not have Arbiter, the evaluator has the option of using an Excel evaluation form, and then translate that information into the Arbiter program for those officials. When it comes to scheduling evaluations, it is up to each individual official and or the association to contact the evaluators and schedule those evaluations throughout the season. So don't expect the evaluators to contact you. You have to go and contact those individuals to conduct those evaluations. Now let's jump on to some of the rule changes, but these are particular to the FHSAA. The major one that affects the officials would be that we no longer have proficiency points. Um, Now, to be a rank 1, 2, or 3 official, you have to hit certain targets to achieve those levels. For instance, to be a rank 1 officials, you have to have a 90 or better on your examination. You have to have a 4 or 5 on your evaluation, and you have to have at least 4 years of experience. You have to have all 3 of those. You have to meet those 3 targets to be a rank 1 official. Um, at the same time, to be a rank 2 officials, it is a little bit lower threshold. You got uh, 80% on the exam, 3 on the evaluation, and 2 or more years of experience to be a rank 2 official. And if you don't hit any of these 6 targets provided here, you'll be a rank 3 official. Just reading some of the questions real quick. Does an evaluator have to be in the same association, or does it have to be from a different association? So an evaluator can be from the same associations. They can do in-house evaluations, or they can do be a third party or an independent individual and go to another associations to do some of their evaluations. It's really up to the evaluator. It's really up to you to select the individual. But the reason we expanded the pool and allowed associations to pick their evaluators is to allow some in-house evaluations. For one, and two, it's because we know we're coming off of a COVID year. And last year, no evaluations were done. So we want to make sure we have enough individuals to get as many evaluations done throughout the season as possible. And to touch on that, because most officials no one got evaluated last year, and it is a 2-year process. We are very cognizant of that. And we want to make sure that when we do playoff assignments, stuff like that, we're going to be reviewing not only the evaluations that were done this year, but if an individual did not get evaluated this year, we'll look at some previous year stuff. So maybe not last year because you didn't get evaluated, but the previous year before that. And if that individual is a new official or did not get evaluated within the last 3 years, we still will not hold that against them. But we definitely will do as much, collect as much information this year as we can. That way we can make the best decision possible. All right, so this next slide is regarding classifications, and this is more of a FYI. This is more for the school's knowledge, but this is also good to know for the officials as well. Just a couple of points regarding classifications. Obviously, the smaller schools go into the 2A class, the larger schools go into the 1A class. The sport of soccer does not have a 1A, or sorry, 7A class for the larger school. The sport of soccer does not have a 1A. 1A is designated for the rural schools, and soccer does not have enough rural schools to have a 1A class. So some of those schools who are typically in rural would generally be in 2A or the 3A class. This year and moving forward, schools are now required to play each other during the regular season for district teammates or different district members are now required to play each other. If they still can if they choose to, but that requirement is no longer there. Now, during the district tournament, at that point, those district members are required to play each other, but during the regular season, they are not. And because of this, there are no appeals, so schools cannot move around because of competitive reason. Now, district assignments are based on strictly enrollment and geography. There are no other factors involved in it. A lot of schools, want to move up and down within classifications because they can't beat or compete with certain schools in their district. Well, that is not an option. They're strictly based on your enrollment numbers, so how many kids are in the hallways and participating, and then your location. And those are the only 2 factors that go into it. And then typically a classification is done once every 2 years. This past year was done for a 1-year cycle because of COVID and the impact it had on enrollment numbers for schools. So there'll be a 1-year cycle, and next year it's going to be reviewed again. And it may be another 2-year cycle or a 1-year cycle, depending on the comfortability our board feels with the enrollment numbers from this past year. Just FYI. And then on top of that, some of the ranking systems that the schools go through, just to keep you in the loop. During the regular season in the sport of soccer, every game counts towards their district seeding. So they are ranked based on what occurred during the regular season, and that ranking specifically seeds their district tournament. Next, you'll see a couple of dates, really not quite important to you as officials, so I'll kind of move on. But after that, once you get to the district tournament, the top 4 seed of the regional tournaments will be the district champions of each of those the 4 tournaments in that region. And then the next highest 4 teams, so the 5 through 8 seeds, will come from the next highest ranked teams in that region. So that's the structure of the regional tournament moving forward. On top of that, the highest seed of each game will host. So if it's a 1 versus 8 matchup, that number 1 seed will host. If it's a 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6, etc., the higher seed of those 2 would host. And then there's something that's real different moving forward in the sport of soccer, as well as volleyball and the sport of football. When it comes to that state semifinal matchup, these are usually done at home school sites, the highest seed will host those games. So if it's a 1 versus 4, no matter where that 1 and that 4 are located in the state, that 4 will have to travel to the 1, and then the 2 versus 3, the 3 seed will have to travel to the 2. So that's a little bit different. So just because of that, when you're looking forward into those regional playoffs and trying to anticipate some of the assignments that will be done. Now we'll jump into some FHSAA points of emphasis. This first one here is one I always like to keep on, which is that the clock procedures. I always want to make sure, because this is unfortunately over the last 10 years have been done so inconsistently across the board. We just want to make sure that everyone's running the clock down to 0. Nobody is stopping the clock at the 2-minute mark. That practice needs to be ceased. The official clock is kept on the field by the contest official. If there is a display clock available in the stadium, it can and should be used. We definitely recommend the schools and the officials to use it. With that said, we urge officials to communicate with the clock operator pregame to make sure that you and that clock operator are on the same page, that they are aware of what the signals are going to be. That there's a clear line of sight between the contest official and that individual, so they can make sure the clock is being stopped. Well, the beauty of soccer is you do have some natural breaks in the game where you can make some of these adjustments. You have the water break midway through each period. It's important during the first water break, you look and see if that clock is in sync with yours. If it is, then your guys are good to go. If it's not, make the adjustment at that point in time. And then once you get to halftime, hopefully you're able to hit that clock at 0. If you have an issue before halftime, then you need to have another quick conversation with that clock operator to make sure you guys are in sync. If at the second water break, you notice that the clock is still not in sync, I definitely urge you guys at that point to turn off the display clock, because at that point it could be confusing towards the end of that game. Or if you feel comfortable, have another adjustment with the clock and move forward. But if it's in sync, then you just continue throughout the game. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that once that display clock hits 0, it matches your wrist or your clock on your wrist also hits 0, and they're hitting at the same time, and that the whistle ends the period, whether it's halftime or the end of game or overtime. It's that end of mark is done by a whistle and not by a horn. The next one here is regarding ejections. So real important, if there's an ejection or red card during the game, an official has 24 hours to submit a AT6 unsportsmanlike conduct form. And this form can be found on the central hub under the ejections. So it's easily located in Arbiter. Also, it's good to note that the school has that same requirement as well. They have the opportunity to submit a form as well on their end to provide their perspective of what occurred during the contest. At that point, once a report is received by both the officials and the schools to the FHSAA office, the FHSAA corrective action team reviews both forms and uses that information provided to make the best possible decision when it comes to the disciplinary action of that student athlete or coach. And once again, that form can be found in Central Hub. So definitely, if something were to occur, go to that form, grab it, and fill it out as soon as possible. And now we'll jump to the NFHS rule changes. And like I said before, there aren't many this year. Thank goodness. There are just a few. So we're just going to review them real quick. The first one is regarding new head coverings, and actually both of these are regarding head coverings. This first one specific to head coverings worn for religious reasons. Head coverings for religious reasons is something that no longer has to be approved by the state association office. If an individual has religious head coverings, they can wear, and they just have to make sure that there are no hard materials clipping or holding the head covering. And I think that's going to be in the next slide. Yeah. And this slide here shows these are the legal items that they can wear. They do not need special permission to wear these. They just need to make sure they don't have any sort of metal items that hold down the head coverings, any sort of bobby pins, clips, etc., that hold down the head coverings. So that's one of the new changes this year. On top of that, the second change is head coverings for medical or cosmetic reasons. This does need to be approved by the FHSAA office or state association. And to get approval from our office, that individual has to provide a medical reason or medical statement to the state association by a licensed medical provider. Without that, they won't be able to be approved for that head covering. And this is just an example. So for those type of head coverings, if it's for any cosmetics or medical reason, that individual does need special permission and would need a letter from the FHSAA office to be allowed to wear that during the contest. Without that special permission, they cannot wear those. One quick editorial change from the NFHS. This is pertaining to free kicks, how the kick is taken. And this is just clarification that was left out from the book the year prior, when the book defined what it means to put the ball in play. They added the verbiage to the free kick. And then basically the ball is in play when it is kicked and moves. That's really what they were trying to do here, just making sure that the free kick statement stays in line with all the other kicks in the book. This is an example of what they mean when it is kicked and moves. All right, so now we'll jump into the NFHS points of emphasis. The first one is regarding field markings and properly worn uniform. This is vital, and this really goes to communication. It is vital that you do some pre-game communications with the coaches if you feel there's inappropriate field markings or lack of field markings or uniform issues. When an official comes in at pre-game, they need to make sure they do the pre-game field inspection. When they do the inspection, they need to observe any issues that they see, any field markings that are being missed, and communicate that information to the school administration as soon as possible. If they're able to make those accommodations, then that's fine, that's great. If they are not, you're instructed as officials to continue playing on, go ahead and play the game with the field provided, and then submit an AT miscellaneous form to our office, where at that point, our office will take over and have those communications with that school administration to make sure those issues are rectified. And the same thing when it comes to uniforms. If a team is wearing illegal uniforms, you want to see if that school can make those adjustments to make them legal. If they're not, if they don't have that ability, you continue to play the game and then submit an AT6 miscellaneous form where our office will communicate with those schools to make sure that they have the appropriate uniforms. These are just some examples of illegal uniforms that you may see. The next one is just an example of field markings. This one's missing the center circle. The next one is recognizing the difference between reckless and serious foul play. This is a major point of emphasis from the NFHS. I'm not going to read this whole passage. This will be provided for you, but I did want to highlight the major difference or definitions per the book of what reckless play is considered and what serious foul play is considered. One is definitely considered a caution. The other one is what we would deem inappropriate or disproportionate and unnecessary force against an opponent, which would deem a red card. So it's important as officials that we're cognizant of the two, and we are able to recognize the difference between the two and provide the appropriate punishment during the game for those actions. On top of that, some ways to combat some of this is addressing fair play and good sportsmanship during pregame. That pregame meeting is vital to each game, and this is an appropriate time when that information is distributed to the coaches as well as the captains, mainly some of the expectations when it comes to the play from the officials. That way you set a tone from the beginning of the game that, serious foul play will not be tolerated at all. Talking to the players and captains during the match is also a way to combat some of these issues, to make sure that if you see intensity in play is increasing, to make sure that you communicate with those players to once again verbalize some of the expectations as a contest officials that you want to see from the student athletes. Dealing with the reckless and foul play immediately. That's a big one. I think a lot of officials a lot of times provide a lot of warnings before they actually caution anyone. I think once you see a play, you call it as you see it and not provide any sort of warnings. The cautions are there, the yellow cards are there for a reason, and that is the warning. In the state of Florida, we do not do card accumulations, so the yellow cards do not necessarily hurt the student athletes. However, if it is a red card, that is a different conversation. But definitely keep that in mind. You want to deal with some of these issues as soon as they happen and not let it fester and become into bigger issues, because that's generally how brawls tend to happen, is when these issues continually happen and cards are not being distributed. And the last one, this is not one I necessarily recommend, but I definitely encourage if you have the capability, would be the use of headsets. The more you can communicate, especially being in such a big and vast field, the more you can communicate, the better you can communicate, the better the game control will be. So if you have the capability, I definitely encourage officials to use a headset, but they are costly, so I don't necessarily recommend it. And then on top of that, just making sure as officials that you guys go into all your training and meetings, and during these meetings you guys are conducting, you guys are watching videos and watching examples of the differences between the fouls and misconducts, recklessness versus serious foul play. The next 3 slides will have some examples, and I did want to put these on here just to make sure we're in the state of Florida. So we want to make sure in the National Information Book, these are all red cards. Actually, 2 of them are red cards, one's a yellow, but in the state of Florida, they're blue cards. So we want to make sure, so they denied obvious goal scoring opportunity outside the box. That is a disqualification of a player. That individual is no longer in the game. That team is playing short. However, it is a blue card, which means that individual will not automatically be suspended for 2 games, which is what the policy dictates if anyone is ejected from a game. The blue card signifies that that player is eligible to participate in the following game, and no AT6 is required to be submitted to our office. And just because of that, there are specific situations where a blue card is warranted, but there are also different situations when a red card is warranted. And that's basically any act that is outside the frame of the game. So any fighting act, any act that is grossly misconduct, like spitting or things like that, cussing, actually even celebrating in an unsporting-like way, those will be considered red cards. Act like doxo or handball in the box that prevents a goal will be, or 2 cautions will be considered blue card. This next one is a foul where a goal is scored inside the penalty box. In this situation, it is a yellow card. Then this last one here is a foul. 2 examples of it. If there's a foul inside the box, the goal is not scored, a penalty kick is awarded. In that scenario, it is a caution if a player commits a foul not attempting to play the ball. So I think that's the important piece. Inside the box and the goal is not scored, that player is disqualified and it receives a blue card. This next one is regarding education-based athletics. I think it's important as officials that we are mindful that high school athletics is education-based. We're not in the club ball or travel team mentality or academy mentality where competitiveness and ability is the #1 factor. This is education-based athletics. So the factor here is making sure the student athletes are gaining knowledge, whether it's through their skill or through social aspects or just learning the game in general. This is a teaching moment. This is an environment that's outside the classroom, but it is an extension of the classroom. And we want to make sure we treat the game as such. And saying that, if you go back to reckless foul play or serious foul play, that needs to be addressed, just like a situation would happen in a classroom where there's a fight or anything like that happens. Those need to be addressed in their own way. On top of that, if there's cussing, unsporting-like conducts, those need to be addressed in their own manners as well, because that expectation is not in the class. The expectation in the classroom is that these acts will not happen, and they dull punishments for those in the classroom. The same is expected on the field. So it's just being mindful of the difference between the levels of play, that high school athletics is educational based. On top of that, a good time to drill that into the coaches and to the captains is during that captain's meeting during the game, to make sure everyone has a little script, a sportsmanship script that they provide to those students and the coaches. That's the appropriate time to do it, to have that communication on the front end of the expectations that this is a high school based team or high school based game, and the expectations are somewhat different than in other levels of soccer. These are just some examples of sportsmanship that they wanted to provide for us. All right, I believe these are the last one when it comes to professionalism and the professional responsibility for the contest officials. In this, the NFHS wants to make sure that officials are aware that they need to be professional and they need to act in a professional manner while on the field. The passages I highlighted: an official shall prepare themselves physically, mentally, shall dress neatly and appropriately, shall master both the rules of the game and the mechanics necessary to enforce the rules, shall exercise impartial authority in a firm and controlled manner, shall stay up to date with the game management and health and safety requirements of the game. That is an important sentence. We want to make sure when we come to these games, we are mentally prepared. We are, you don't have to know all the rules off the top of your head, but you have to prepare yourself in a way where you know almost all the rules. And if you don't, you're able to communicate with each other to get the right call, to get the call right. But you also want to be physically fit, physically ready for a soccer contest. You know, in soccer, you do run a lot. So you want to make sure that you do your due diligence and put yourself in a place where you're physically able to conduct yourself in a way where it does not interfere with the student athletes, because it's not fair for those students. They're physically fit and ready to go for the game. The expectation is that as contest official, we're on that same level as well. So just be mindful when you come into a place where, you know, a neat uniform, they see the shield, people are going to respect you more. But if you come in a very sloppy way, you're going to see that the folks will treat you in a different manner. So just be professional as much as possible when coming into a contest. And this is just an example. And just to say one more thing, when you're wearing that uniform, not only are you representing your local association, you're representing the FHSAA. So you have to, as an official, come in with that mindset that you're representing the state of Florida on your chest when you're doing these contests. So make sure when you come in looking professional. You speak to the coaches, the players in a professional manner. You come in very, very serious and firm way to control the contest from the very beginning. And make sure when you do so that you're respectful and courteous to everyone involved, whether it's coaches, players, spectators, administrators, etc. And with that said, that concludes this presentation. As I said, the rules are somewhat short this year, which is somewhat atypical from previous years. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and address those. All right, at this point, seeing none, we'll go ahead and conclude the presentation. During the season and during the postseason, feel free to reach out to my office if you have any sports specific questions with the contact information here. If you have any questions regarding registration or as it pertains to arbiter, your best point of contact will be either Jeremy Hernandez or Taylor Guys. They can address you specifically with any officials related questions, but if it comes to anything regarding the sport and rules of the sport, feel free to reach out to my office. So question on persistent infractions and earnings. Can you clarify on that? Oh, warnings. So are you, I'm assuming you're asking if a team has constant infractions and warnings, or providing infractions and warnings. Guess I need a little more clarity on that one.
While we get clarity on that one, I want to just take the time thank Alex for doing this tonight. Thank all of you for joining us on a Friday evening. But one thing that Alex didn't mention regarding the AT6 and the ejection reports, I just want to kind of throw in a little spiel regarding that as I kind of lead that committee for the corrective action team. Please submit that paperwork as accurate and factual as possible. This fall and part of last season, we've had to work through some instances where associations weren't turning that information in, and we were finding out from the schools when they submit their stuff. So please just be mindful that you as an official or our association leaders, if any of you are on, please just be mindful that that information is required within 24 hours. There is a penalty, a sanction that's either placed on the association or the official themselves depending on the circumstance once we investigate from our office for not submitting that paperwork. So just want to be give a reminder to our officials, be mindful of that, the importance of that paperwork for our office.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, here comes a question. You say no warnings. I found that there are similar to fouls. A warning lets a player know that the next time will be a yellow. Yes. This is something that you probably want to measure as the game progresses. If you're seeing the same fouls being occurring, if it's a reckless foul, and I think that's the important distinction. If it's just a ticky-tack thing, yes, warn them. But if it's a reckless foul, you got to call it. You got to call it as it occurs. I think that's the important thing, because what happens is the opposing player sees that a reckless foul is not called, and they'll deliver the same actions with the same intensity to the opposing player. And that's where you start getting some of that aggression. So you do want, if you see a reckless foul, you need to call and divvy out that yellow, because that yellow is the warning. That is the warning that you're provided for the game. Hopefully that answers it. All right, seeing no other questions, I guess we will conclude at this point. Like Jeremy said, I do want to thank everyone who participated in this presentation, taking time of your evening to view it. This presentation will be available to you at the Central Hub, so feel free to let your officials or your fellow officials and your cohorts know that this is available to them, and they can view it at any time throughout the season and after the conclusion of the season as well. Thank you and have a good evening.